For almost 9 years, Jonas Hale lived alone on the wide Texas plains, far from towns, neighbors, and the busy noise of other people. His days passed quietly, shaped by the same simple tasks: feeding his small animals, checking the fences, and keeping his cabin standing against wind, heat, and storms. To anyone else, such a life might have felt heavy or empty, but for Jonas, it became a kind of slow breathing, a quiet rhythm he followed because there was nothing else left to follow. Jonas had not always been a man of silence. In his younger days, he had been known across ranches as someone with an easy smile, a warm handshake, and a voice that carried across the campfire. But life had taken turns he never expected, and each turn had pushed him farther from crowds, farther from noise, and finally, farther from hope. When the hardships came, one after another, Jonas didn't fight them with anger. Instead, he stepped back from the world, as if the land itself welcomed him into its emptiness. The cabin he lived in sat on a low rise overlooking a stretch of grassland that seemed endless. There were mornings when the sky opened pink and blue above him, so wide that Jonas couldn't tell where the world ended and the heavens began. The air was usually cool and carried the scent of dry grass and old earth. It was peaceful, but it was also lonely. Some nights, the silence was so complete that Jonas felt as if time itself had stopped. He wasn't a man who liked to talk about the past. The walls of his cabin held a few reminders, a faded picture, a couple of folded letters, but they were stored away in a drawer he rarely opened. Not because the memories were painful in a dramatic way, but because thinking about them made him feel hollow, like he was trying to grab smoke with his hands. It was easier to keep moving, to keep fixing things, to keep breathing quietly. Jonas's routine was simple and steady. He woke before the sun rose, stepped outside to greet the morning air, and checked on the few animals he still kept: an aging horse, a pair of goats, and a dog named Cooper, who had wandered onto his land one year and never left. Cooper was a calm dog, with soft eyes and a gentle trot. He never barked much, but he stayed close to Jonas, as if he sensed the man's loneliness and chose to keep it company. After tending to the animals, Jonas usually walked to the edge of his land, checking the old fence line that stretched across several acres. The fence didn't need care every day, but Jonas liked having something to do, something that made sense. The quiet rattling of the wire, the warm weight of tools in his hands. These small tasks grounded him. They reminded him that some things, at least, could stay in place if cared for. His cabin, though simple, was sturdy. Jonas had built most of it himself, adding pieces over the years. A small porch overlooked the plains. A narrow chimney rose from the roof, releasing thin curls of smoke on cold nights. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood, dust, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs that Jonas used for tea. There was no luxury in his life, but there was a certain comfort in the simplicity. Everything had a purpose. Everything had a place. Meals were plain: beans, bread, dried meat, and whatever vegetables he managed to grow in the garden behind the cabin. The garden was small but healthy. Jonas tended it carefully, protecting it from wind and thirsty animals. Tending plants gave him a quiet joy, a sense of caring for something that depended on him. Watching green sprouts push through the soil felt like watching small promises take shape. Sometimes, when the afternoons were long and the heat pressed down gently, Jonas would sit in the shade of his porch and watch the horizon. He didn't watch for anything in particular. There were rarely visitors and few animals passed by that far from town. He simply liked the way the light shifted across the grass, the way the clouds drifted slowly like great ships crossing a silent ocean. The world had a softness in those moments, a calmness that made him feel a little less alone. He rarely traveled to town anymore. Maybe once every 3 or 4 months he would ride in to buy supplies and collect mail. The people in town knew him well enough to nod politely, but few bothered to ask questions. Jonas wasn't unfriendly. He simply didn't invite conversation. He spoke when needed, thanked people when they helped him, and left without staying long. The shopkeepers had learned not to expect stories or long chats. Jonas was a man who came and went like a quiet shadow. Despite the silence around him, Jonas's mind was not empty. He thought often about the land, about the past, about the peculiar ways life shaped a person. Sometimes he thought about mistakes. Sometimes he thought about small joys he once had. Occasionally, he wondered whether his solitude was a choice or something that had happened to him little by little, like sand slipping through fingers until only a few grains remained. The nights were the hardest. When the wind outside softened and the stars filled the sky, Jonas would sit by the small fire inside his cabin and listen to it crackle. Cooper slept nearby, his slow breathing the only sound in the room. Jonas often found himself staring into the flames, watching them flicker and rise. He didn't feel sorrow exactly, just a deep quiet that sometimes felt too big for one person. On rare nights, when sleep refused to come, he would step outside and stand beneath the sky. The moonlight washed the plains in silver, and the stars seemed close enough to touch. The cool air wrapped around him, and he felt a sense of peace, even if it was tinged with loneliness. He wondered if anyone else, somewhere far off, was also standing alone under the same sky. As the years passed, Jonas became almost part of the land itself. His clothes held the scent of dust and sun. His hands grew rough but skillful. His quiet smile, though rare, had become softer, gentler. The storms of his past no longer felt sharp. They were more like distant echoes, fading slowly with time. Despite the stillness of his life, there was something steady inside him, something that refused to disappear completely. It might have been hope, or maybe just the natural strength a person develops after living close to the earth for so long. Jonas never named it, never tried to understand it. He simply carried it with him, the way one carries a quiet tune in their heart. Seasons changed, and Jonas changed with them. Summers brought bright heat and long days. Winters brought cold winds that rattled the cabin walls. Spring surprised him every year with new blossoms in the grass and fresh green shoots in the garden. Autumn wrapped the land in warm colors and soft breezes. Through it all, Jonas did what he always did. He lived, he worked, he breathed, and he waited, though he didn't know what he was waiting for. He didn't expect anything to change. He didn't imagine that one day a stranger would knock on his door. He didn't think about meeting someone new or sharing his quiet world with another soul. He believed his life was set, shaped by the choices he had made and the circumstances he could not control. But life has a way of moving quietly in the background, preparing surprises that arrive without warning. Jonas didn't know it then. But the 9th year of his solitude would bring the first real shift he had felt in a very long time. It would arrive not with noise, but with a soft knock, a gentle presence, a simple request for warmth. And that moment, unexpected, gentle, and filled with quiet meaning, would be the beginning of everything that came afterward. For Jonas Hale, that evening began like any other. The sun dipped low behind the plains, turning the sky soft shades of orange and pink. The wind settled, the animals grew quiet, and a calm stillness covered the land like a warm blanket. Jonas finished his chores earlier than usual and sat on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the faint rustling of grass in the distance. He didn't expect company. He never did. In 9 years, only 3 people had ever come to his cabin. 2 were neighbors checking on him after a storm, and 1 was a lost traveler looking for the main road. Jonas had grown so used to the quiet that the idea of a visitor felt as strange as snow in summer. As the sky grew darker, Jonas stood and stretched his stiff back. Cooper, his dog, sat by the steps watching him with lazy eyes. Jonas patted Cooper's head and walked inside, preparing to light a small fire for the night. The cabin always felt cozier with a bit of warmth, especially when the air outside carried a chill. Just as he placed a log into the fireplace, Cooper lifted his head sharply. His ears perked up, and he gave a soft, curious whine. Jonas paused. He knew Cooper well. This was not his usual sound. It wasn't warning or fear. It was something like surprise. Jonas straightened and listened. At first he heard nothing. Then, a moment later, there it was. A faint sound, soft and steady. Footsteps. Human footsteps. Someone was walking toward the cabin. Jonas's heart thumped once, hard, not from fear, but from pure shock. It had been so long since he'd heard such a sound that he almost believed he imagined it. He moved to the window and looked out. The world outside looked still, touched only by moonlight. But the footsteps continued, slow and careful, as if the person approaching was tired or cautious. Then came the gentle knock, not loud, not hurried, just a soft tap on the wooden door, polite, almost shy. Jonas took a breath, laid his hand on the door, and opened it slowly. Standing there was a woman he had never seen before. Her dark hair fell loosely around her shoulders, carrying bits of wind-blown grass and dry leaves. Her clothes were layered, simple, practical, travel-worn. She looked tired, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but her eyes were calm, steady, and clear. She raised her gaze to meet his. "Good evening," she said softly. Her voice carried a quiet strength, a gentle confidence that contrasted with her fragile appearance. Jonas swallowed, unsure how to respond at first. "Evening," he said after a second. His voice sounded rough to his own ears. "Can I help you with something?" The woman nodded slightly. "I've been walking for several hours. The wind turned cold and the night came faster than I expected." She took a small pause, gathering her breath. "If it isn't too much trouble, could I rest by your fire for a little while, just long enough to warm myself?" Her words were simple, respectful, without a trace of demand. Jonas blinked, surprised, not by the request, but by the warmth in her tone. In 9 years, no stranger had spoken to him like that. He stepped back immediately, opening the door wider. "Of course," he said. "Come in. The fire's going." She entered quietly, walking with careful steps, not out of weakness, but out of mindful respect for the space. Cooper sniffed the air and wagged his tail slightly, sensing no harm. Jonas took that as a good sign. Cooper was a better judge of people than he was. The woman approached the fire and sat on the small wooden chair Jonas pulled out for her. The flames cast a soft light across her face, revealing delicate lines of fatigue, but also a calm expression that didn't match someone lost or in distress. "Thank you," she said gently, holding her hands toward the warmth. "The cold caught me by surprise." "You're welcome," Jonas replied, taking the seat opposite her. "It can get cold fast out here." For a moment, silence filled the cabin. Not the heavy, lonely silence Jonas was used to, but a peaceful one that settled naturally between them. The fire crackled softly. After a few minutes, the woman spoke again. "My name is Ayana." Her name rolled off her tongue smoothly, almost musical in sound. Jonas nodded. "Jonas," he replied. She dipped her head politely. "It's good to meet you, Jonas." He wasn't used to such formal kindness. It made something shift inside him, quietly, gently. Ayana explained that she had been traveling on foot between communities, carrying herbs and supplies to trade. She was a herbalist, she said, taught by her mother and grandmother, both wise women known for their knowledge. She often traveled these stretches of land, but she rarely passed near Jonas's cabin. This time, the cold wind had pushed her off her usual path. As she spoke, Jonas listened closely. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of a softness he wasn't sure he remembered how to be around. There was something grounding about her presence, something peaceful. He noticed that although she was tired, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She didn't seem afraid, even though she stood alone in the middle of unfamiliar land. Her calmness made Jonas feel more at ease than he expected. "Would you like something warm to drink?" Jonas asked after a moment. Ayanna looked up, a small, grateful smile forming. "If it's no trouble?" Jonas stood and prepared tea. His movements a little awkward because guests had become such a rare event in his life. He placed the cup in her hands, noticing how cold her fingers were. She wrapped both hands around the cup and took a slow sip. "This is very good," she said, genuinely appreciative. Jonas sat back down. "It's simple." "Simple things are often the best," she replied with a small smile. They continued talking quietly. Ayanna shared stories from her travels. Campfires with friends, long stretches of walking alone, nights spent under the stars, mornings filled with birdsong. Her stories were not dramatic or heavy. They were gentle memories, told with a peaceful rhythm that filled the cabin with warmth even without the fire. Jonas found himself speaking, too, more than he had spoken to anyone in years. He told her about his cabin, his animals, his garden. Not about his past, not yet, but about his life now, the quiet routines, the land, the changing seasons. Ayanna listened with genuine interest, her eyes reflecting the fire's glow. At one point, she said softly, "You live close to the land. Not many people do that anymore." "I guess I do," Jonas said, surprised by the pride he felt at her words. Outside, the night deepened, turning the world dark and still. Ayanna's shoulders relaxed as warmth returned to her limbs. She set the empty cup down gently. "If it's all right," she said, "I would like to rest here a little longer before I continue. I don't want to trouble you more than necessary." Jonas shook his head. "You're not troubling me. You're welcome to stay until the wind settles." Ayanna gave a soft, grateful nod. "Thank you. The plains can be friendly in daylight, but nights can feel endless when the cold rises." Jonas knew that feeling better than he wished to admit. They sat quietly for a while longer. Cooper rested at Ayanna's feet, already comfortable around her. The fire danced in the hearth, warming the cabin with its soft glow. Jonas studied Ayanna quietly, not in a curious or judging way, but in the gentle way one observes someone who feels unexpectedly familiar. There was something different about her, not because she was a stranger, but because she carried a sense of calm that softened the cabin's long-held loneliness. Ayanna eventually looked toward the door. "The wind has quieted a little," she said. Jonas listened. She was right. The sharp chill that had been pushing against the cabin earlier had softened, still cold, but calmer. "You're welcome to stay the night," Jonas said quietly, surprising even himself with the offer. "It's warmer in here than out there." Ayanna hesitated only for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. Then she nodded. "If you are sure, I'll accept." Jonas prepared a simple sleeping space near the fire. Ayanna thanked him with genuine warmth. She settled in, pulling a blanket around herself, her face relaxing as comfort settled into her bones. "I didn't expect kindness tonight," she said softly. "I'm grateful." Jonas didn't know what to say at first. Finally, he replied with a simple truth. "It's been a long time since I've had someone to offer kindness to." Ayanna's eyes softened with quiet understanding. As she drifted into sleep, Jonas sat by the fire, watching the flames and listening to her steady breathing. A strange feeling filled his chest, something unfamiliar yet gentle. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't fear. It was a quiet sense of change, as if the air itself had shifted. For 9 years, Jonas had lived alone, surrounded only by silence and memory. But tonight, the silence had been broken by a soft knock. and the cabin felt warmer than it had in a very long time. Morning arrived slowly, touching the edges of the plains with soft gold light. The air outside was still cool, but inside Justin's cabin, the fire had burned low into warm embers that glowed gently like sleeping stars. Jonas woke early as he always did, but something felt different the moment he opened his eyes. For the first time in years, the cabin wasn't silent. There was a quiet breath, steady, soft, peaceful. Ayanna was still asleep, wrapped gently in the blanket Jonas had given her. Cooper lay beside her as if he had been keeping guard through the night. Jonas stood quietly so he wouldn't wake her and stepped outside to greet the day. The sky was clear, brushed with the pale colors of dawn. Jonas inhaled deeply, letting the cool air fill his lungs. Something inside him felt lighter, like a long-locked window had been opened a little. He looked back toward the cabin, thinking about the unexpected visitor who had turned his usual silence into gentle company. When he returned inside, Ayanna was sitting up, adjusting the blanket neatly. Her eyes lifted when she heard him, and she gave a small, warm smile. "Good morning, Jonas," she said kindly. "Morning," Jonas replied, feeling strangely nervous despite the calmness in her voice. "Did you sleep all right?" "Yes," she said, stretching her hands toward the embers. "Your cabin is warm, and the fire was comforting." Jonas nodded and began preparing a simple breakfast: bread, a bit of dried fruit, and warm tea. Ayanna offered to help, but Jonas shook his head. "You're my guest," he said quietly. She didn't argue. Instead, she watched him with an expression that felt respectful, almost thoughtful. It had been a long time since someone sat in his cabin like this. Someone calm, someone present, someone who wasn't in a hurry. When they sat down to eat, Ayanna spoke gently. "You live a peaceful life here." Jonas shrugged slightly. "Mostly quiet." "Quiet can be peaceful," she replied. "Sometimes quiet is needed." He didn't respond right away, because her words felt deeper than simple conversation. After a moment, he asked, "Is traveling peaceful?" Ayanna smiled softly. "Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Traveling gives freedom, but it also carries loneliness. Not many people understand that balance." Jonas looked at her with quiet surprise. She seemed to understand him without needing long explanations. After breakfast, Ayanna stood and walked to the door. "Would you mind if I stepped outside for a moment? I'd like to stretch my legs." "Go ahead," Jonas said. He watched from the doorway as she walked slowly across the small patch of open land beside the cabin. The morning light rested gently on her dark hair. She looked peaceful, almost becoming part of the land itself. She kneeled near a patch of wildflowers, touching their petals gently, as if greeting something familiar. Ayanna had a way of moving, soft, sure, unhurried, that made the world around her feel calmer. Jonas stepped beside her. "You know a lot about plants?" She nodded. "Yes, my mother taught me since I was small. Plants have stories. They speak with scents, colors, seasons. If you learn to listen, they teach you things." Jonas smiled softly. "I just see plants as things that grow." Ayanna laughed gently, a warm sound that floated easily in the morning air. "They grow, yes, but each for a reason." She pointed to one plant with long leaves. "This one helps calm the mind." She pointed to another with tiny yellow blossoms. "This one eases tiredness." Jonas listened with interest he didn't expect. "You really know them well." "My family learns from the land," Ayanna said simply. "It has always been our teacher." Jonas looked at her for a moment, thoughtful. "Maybe I should start listening more." "You already do," she answered. "Anyone who lives alone this long becomes part of the land in some way." Her words touched something in Jonas, something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Not sadness, not joy, something like recognition. They walked back toward the cabin, and Ayana paused to look at his garden. "This is well cared for," she said. "It's small," Jonas replied. "It's alive," she said with quiet appreciation. "And you made it that way." Jonas didn't hear compliments often. For a moment, he didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded. Inside the cabin, Ayana sat by the fire again. Jonas found himself studying her, not in a curious or uncomfortable way, but with quiet wonder. She made the cabin look different, warmer somehow. As if her presence filled spaces he hadn't noticed were empty. Jonas decided to open the drawer where he kept old letters. He rarely touched them, but something about the morning, about Ayana's calmness, made him feel brave enough to open the drawer and stare at the worn envelopes. Ayana noticed. "Are those important?" Jonas hesitated. They were. Her voice remained gentle. "You don't have to tell me anything. I only asked because they look cared for." Jonas appreciated that she didn't push. Most people would ask questions, but Ayana didn't. She waited, letting him decide whether to speak or stay silent. After a long moment, Jonas put the letters back and closed the drawer. When he turned around, Ayana's eyes were soft, filled with quiet respect. She understood more from his silence than others might have from his words. Later, the two of them went outside again. Jonas needed to check the fence line. Ayana walked beside him, not needing directions, simply following his pace. Cooper trotted along happily, enjoying the company. "Your land is beautiful," Ayana said, looking around. Jonas smiled faintly. "I've grown used to it." "You see it every day," she replied, but new eyes noticed different things. They reached a point where the fence leaned slightly. Jonas began adjusting it, and Ayana watched for a moment before kneeling beside him. "May I help?" Jonas hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," she said gently. "But helping is natural when someone shows kindness." Jonas handed her a small tool. She took it easily, her hands skillful and steady. Together, they worked quietly, their movements syncing without need for words. Jonas felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of partnership, simple but meaningful. When the fence was secured, Ayana brushed her hands clean and smiled. That felt good. Working with the land is grounding. Jonas nodded. It's honest work. They walked back toward the cabin slowly, enjoying the soft breeze passing through the grass. The sky was bright now, full of light. Ayana's steps were steady, but Jonas noticed something. Her shoulders were still carrying the weight of travel. "Are you tired?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "Travel makes the body strong, but it also wears it down." "You're welcome to rest longer," Jonas said. "There's no hurry." Ayana looked at him with gratitude. "You've been very kind, Jonas." Jonas shook his head. "You deserve kindness." Her eyes softened. "So do you." The simple statement surprised Jonas. He wasn't used to being seen that way. Inside again, Ayana helped him prepare tea. They sat across from each other, the firelight dancing between them. The quiet hours drifted gently, filled with soft conversation and comfortable silences. Ayana told him stories of places she had traveled, open fields, small gatherings, friendly people who shared meals and laughter. Jonas listened with full attention, imagining places he hadn't visited in years. In return, Jonas shared small things, memories of building the cabin, the early days with Cooper, the challenges of the land. Ayana listened with a sincerity that made Jonas feel heard in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. The day passed almost without notice. When the sun lowered toward the horizon again, the cabin glowed warmly from within. Ayana sat near the fire, brushing her long hair gently. Jonas watched her for a moment, thinking how natural it felt to have her there. "I didn't expect to spend the whole day here," she said with a soft smile. I didn't expect company either, Jonas replied. But it was a good day, she said. Jonas nodded slowly. Yes, it was. There was something unspoken between them, something gentle, growing quietly like a seed planted in warm soil. Ayanna looked at the door, then back at Jonas. When the morning comes, I should continue my journey. Jonas felt a small ache in his chest at her words, but he nodded. I understand. Ayanna smiled gently. But for tonight, I am grateful to stay. As the fire crackled softly and the night wrapped around the cabin, Jonas realized something important, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He didn't want the silence back, not yet, not after this. And in that quiet space, with Ayanna's calm presence near him, Jonas understood that sometimes the smallest steps, like sharing a meal, fixing a fence, or offering warmth, could open the heart in ways that felt both new and familiar. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in 9 years, he looked forward to finding out.